Hi, you're listening to Photofocus. My name is Rich Harrington, and this is the August 15th edition. Joining me today is my co-host, Scott Bourne. How you doing, Scott?
Hey, Rich. I'm hanging in there. How about you?
Good. Just getting ready to head on the road to L.A. here shortly for a project, and you just got off the road. So mind telling us a little bit about Skip's summer school? What stood out?
I was at Skip's summer school in Chicago. It was great. We had just an unbelievable who's who of instructors, and then there was me. But we had Jerry Guionis, Melissa Guionis, we had Catherine Hall, we had Michelle Celentano, we had Tony Corbell, we had Kevin Kubota, we had Clay Blackmore, we had Calvin with him. He's always great. We had a video team that made a movie that I starred in, which I'm going to have to share with you. Cool. It's unbelievable. Their assignment for the 2 days was to write, script, shoot, edit, produce this movie. And that was a lot of fun.
And you were best on the casting couch? That's how you got the role?
Actually, I had nothing to do with it. That was part of the deal. They had to do it all. And then I was cast against type as the millionaire sitting by the pool with the people in the swimsuits.
Oh, you have no experience with that, living in Vegas with all those pools and people that just wear swimsuits all day long. That's great.
It was hard work, while Skip had to run on a treadmill.
Wow. Well, it sounds...
But there was a lot. This was very interesting. It was a very hands-on week. Everybody got to shoot with pros. It wasn't a portfolio building event necessarily, but a lot of people learned lots of... The thing that I learned from sitting and observing, I sat in on a few minutes of each class just to see that everybody was doing fine, etc. And the thing that I learned is there are still a lot of people that really don't know thing one about lighting. Not thing one.
Yeah.
What they know is how to duplicate something they saw on the Strobist site or on somebody else's site. They know no lighting theory. So my admonition to our audience today is try to dig a little bit deeper on the lighting subject, because if the audience is representative of the 200 or 300 people that were at Skip Summer School, then they need help with lighting. And that was the one thing I took away, that the people just drank up anything they could get on lighting and posing too. Those are two very weak areas when people are shooting portraits. Now, for the folks that don't shoot portraits, it's no big deal. But it was a good week, and I had fun, and I got to meet a lot of nice people. Several of our listeners were there, came up and introduced themselves, and I signed copies of the Going Pro book. So yeah, it was a fun time. And now getting ready to head to Photoshop World in September and do the same thing.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well. So for our listeners who are going to be traveling to Photoshop World, both Scott and I will be speaking there. We'll do a tweet up and some get-togethers, so follow us both on Twitter. I'm at RedPixel, RedPixel, and Scott, you're just Scott Bourne.
COTTBOURNE.
Yeah, and I think we're also going to have a Smug Mug get-together while we're there, so we're still hammering out the details.
Yeah, that's the plan.
So definitely look us up while we're there. Actually, you brought up lighting, and there's been a couple of other issues that have been popping up with a lot of questions lately. Let's start there. On the lighting front, I think people don't really know where to start. I mean, for me, it's a combination of things I learned, back in the day of school on light and its properties and how color works. And then stepping forward, obviously lots of conferences have lighting workshops. You can, just get hands-on time. I actually finally, and you brought this up with shooting portraits, I finally gave in and got a set of strobes. And this is not something I was planning on, but I just found myself needing to do some portrait shooting. And obviously it's learning all over again. I've been shooting for years with natural light. I've been shooting for years with video light. Obviously, each style of lighting you choose is going to require you to sort of relearn.
Yeah, the strobes give you a lot of flexibility. The problem with strobes, of course, is that you have to have, either a very expensive battery pack, and we're talking in the neighborhood of $1,500 to $2,000 for a good one, or you have to have access to alternating current if you're here in the United States. And natural light, you don't need anything. You can just, take the sun and move it around. Of course, now when you use hot lights, you still need power. But hot lights are easier to learn from. So I kind of have developed this opinion, Rich, is that you should first master natural light. You should first learn how to move the sun around using reflectors and diffusers, etc.
And that's certainly the most affordable place for most people to start, and that natural light's kind of there, and a couple of reflectors will set you back less than $100.
And if you go to Home Depot, less than $50.
Yeah.
You can make your own diffusers, reflectors, white cards, V cards, flats, etc.
Just get the shiny board that they often use for insulation, or the Tyvek sheets. There's lots of ways of doing it. Yeah, absolutely.
Or big pieces of foam core, black and white, black to block light, because believe me, lighting is as much about blocking light as it is adding light, which is something most amateurs don't know. But yeah, start with that. Then my advice is to move on to hot lights, or continuous lighting, or LED lighting, some lighting source where there's no strobe, because what you see is what you get. And while I was at Skip Summer School, I got to play with and obtained Jerry Gionis's lovely new Icelight. We're going to talk about that in a whole separate post on the Photofocus blog in a couple of weeks, and we're going to have Jerry on to demonstrate it. But it is one of the coolest products I've ever seen. It's not inexpensive at $500, but if you want to, you could actually teach a lighting class with one of these Icelights, because in a matter of moments, you can just handily move the light with your hand and say, okay, this is Rembrandt lighting, this is butterfly lighting, this is broad lighting, this is short lighting, this is split lighting. And it really is a good teaching tool, but also great to have if you just need a nice little soft, unobtrusive source of light for a portrait or lighting a product in a dark scene. In fact, I've already tested it by shooting a car in a garage that's completely black, basically, bringing the Icelight up to just the logo on the car, and it created kind of a beautiful, soft fall off. And anyway, so I think that's the next step. And then moving on to strobes. Many strobes, and I don't know what strobes you bought, Rich, but many strobes come with modeling lights, which sort of help you position the light. Do yours have modeling lights?
Yep. Yeah, there's definitely a modeling light in them. I went with a set of 3 strobes. I'm happy. It definitely took a little getting used to, and I ended up going with soft boxes as well. There was umbrellas in the kit, but I decided I liked the soft boxes. Definitely worked. I was actually recording a title on green screen, and we were doing a combination of both video and strobe lighting, and it worked well. I was surprised at the flexibility. It took a little bit of tweaking, and I definitely learned, just like when shooting video with green screen, that lighting the green screen independently from the lighting for the subject really worked. But it was just a lot of fun. We just were playing around and doing some portraits on green screen, both video and still. And after a little bit, I was definitely getting the results I wanted. It was a soccer player, so we were getting a lot of action and ball bounces, and the strobes were helping with freezing light. As someone coming from a video background, that's one of the things I often forget, that if you really crank those lights up, you could just get really crisp, frozen moments, the hair, the ball flying, things like that.
Yeah, another thing to remember with the strobes is that if you're going to use soft boxes, or even with the hot lights, if you're going to use soft boxes, softbox positioning is another place I've seen a lot of what we might call unforced errors on the side of the photographer. The biggest error I saw at Skip Summer School as I was watching students position softboxes was the angle of the softbox was wrong in terms of its relationship to the face.
Well, what are you doing?
The goal
30,
is
40 degrees?
Unless you're trying to create like Hollywood effect of ghoul lighting for like the movie Halloween, for instance, you don't want to light with the softbox underneath the subject,
right?
Because that's going to give that Halloween look, the shadowy kind of look. And if you light from the top down, you're going to create ugly shadows because the eyebrows stick out over the cheekbones, and that's going to create raccoon eyes. So the goal is to kind of make sure that whatever angle the face is at, that the softbox is perpendicular to that angle, not higher or lower than that. And that's a very basic lesson, by the way. And yes, now I'll get 2,000 emails where people will explain to me the one instance where that's not.
To the rules.
Yeah, but to save them, I won't read them. The bottom line is this is a generalization, but it's one that apparently a lot of people need. And I was able to see how once folks got that, their eyes kind of lit up, and they were like, oh, yeah, and the pictures look better. This is how to prove this right or wrong. Simply do what I'm asking you to do and take a look at the results. Do the opposite of what I'm asking you to do and take a look at the results. You go, oh, Scott was right. Yeah, keep the softbox angle perpendicular to the face, unless You can articulate with specificity a reason for doing it otherwise, like you do want ghoulish lighting, or for some reason you think raccoon eyes look really good in a picture.
Well, also, I think a lot of people forget that they could be using a reflector on the opposite side to bounce a little back, or even a second light at a lower power. So key and fill. So yeah, there's lots of it's fun, and I think that sort of builds onto one of the things. Let's talk a little bit before we get into some of those other basic issues. A couple of other essential pieces when you are configuring your studio. I've been looking around at some extra gear, trying some things. I came across a nice stand for keeping the laptop nearby for shooting tethered. What's your feelings on tethered shooting? Is it something you like to do? I find when I have clients or I have, an assistant, having it being tethered to a larger screen is useful so we can all see the same image. But if I'm shooting by myself, it's not really something I do.
Well, the only time I shoot tethered is either for a class to show them the results, or when I'm working with an art director who has really the ultimate say over how the session goes. They look at the tethered shot and say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Because at those, literally, I have zero impact on the editing in that process. I don't get to pick the best pictures. The art director does. So that's a great time to use tethering. I don't think it's essential for most people, but I'll tell you what is: sandbags.
Yeah, no, sandbags are. Actually, well, two things there. Yeah, one, we always put on the monitor, we put sandbags. We've been playing with the idea of tethered, into Lightroom or Aperture versus just going right out the HDMI port and letting it mirror in slideshow mode. And I'm finding that going out the HDMI is a little bit faster on a large screen. Obviously, you get the ability to zoom and check finer detail if you're using a photo system. Sandbags are cheap. They're easy. Good stands for that matter. A lot of people get really cheap folding light stands, which are great for traveling. But in the studio, I'm a big fan of having a real C-stand to support the weight and, just cut down on, things falling over. I mean, gear falling over kind of ruins the gear.
Yeah, listen, when it comes to an actual studio, you want C-stands. The two big brands, the big brand is Avenger, Bogan Avengers. They've been around forever. They're big, they're heavy, they're nasty, they're gnarly, and they're supposed to be. And they stand up to pretty much anything. The next big company in line probably is Matthews. Theirs are going to be a little bit cheaper sometimes. But those are the two big companies that make stands, the Avengers and the Matthews stands. And these are the kind of stands you want. And you want to use boom arms. And if you're going to use boom arms, you got to use counterweights. And there's all kinds of stuff like that. But you can never have too many C-stands, too much money, or too much compact flash memory.
And these C-stands and this investment in gear lasts forever. Plus, you can always find people selling them used. I mean, we have C-stands that are 30 years old in my studio, and they work just fine.
Yeah, you will never, if you can't break a C-stand. You can drop a C-stand 100 feet, it won't break. They're just... As you're getting a good one, that is. Yeah. This stuff will last you forever, and you never know when you're going to need it. Now, if you're a person who shoots in the studio twice a year, go rent this stuff.
Yeah, and when we travel, we rent all the time. I mean, you can always find. Just look for a grip house. A lot of times, if you're not finding photo gear, you could find a video lighting house or a grip house, and they have the same equipment. There's a lot of overlap.
Or in big cities like Chicago, L.A., New York, there are grip trucks you can rent.
Yeah,
the truck just rolls up, and it's like a hot dog vendor. What do you want? Sauerkraut, mustard? They got everything. Yeah, so if you don't shoot that often, you don't need this stuff. Duct tape, you got to have a lot of that. Gaffing tape, etc., so that you can tape down cords so you don't get sued, you don't trip over things, you don't destroy your brand new $8,000 Elinchrom head. That's always important. Gloves hanging on every hot light is a rule in my studio. If it's a hot light, there's a pair of gloves hanging there. No gloves, no hot light, because they're called hot lights for a reason.
Well, and on the hot light front, we're actually seeing sort of a hybrid in there. I was playing with some of the new Lowell LED lights that are like hot lights. They don't get hot. I mean, I used one for 4 hours, and I like.
Yeah. LED lights are the exception. They do not get hot.
Yeah, but you still light the same way with them, and that's kind of the nice thing. Like I found I really liked. Now, these are a little more expensive, but from the comfort factor of everyone in the room, it's kind of nice to not feel like that hamburger under the heat lamp at the.
If you can afford them, but I think I read somewhere that it's about a 4-to-1 ratio to equip a studio with big LEDs versus Kino flows.
Yeah, although you do have the issue over time with what happens to the bulbs, in transport.
Exactly.
It is more upfront. I actually have both Kino flows and LEDs in my studio, and I love my Kino flows. The LEDs travel better for me. I don't arrive with broken bulbs, and I don't have to be quite as careful. But yeah, it's all different approaches. Well, actually,
you know how you can avoid traveling with that stuff, Rich?
get really good and make everybody come to you.
No, you call borrowlenses.com.
Oh, okay.
If you call borrowlenses.com, they actually carry all that stuff. They carry all the standard photo stuff. They carry all the standard video stuff now, too. So if you know you're going to Atlanta for a shoot, you're staying at the Hilton, just have everything shipped to the Hilton, attention, your name upon arrival, and you don't have to put it on the plane. You don't have to deal with TSA ripping it apart. You don't have to have a flight attendant give you dirty looks, and you don't have to have some old woman who's got nothing better to do call the Homeland Security line and say that you're carrying a big metal bomb. So I would consider renting the stuff. And if you get good pictures while you're out shooting, I want to make another recommendation. You should post them on SmugMug. SmugMug Pro is the best place I know to sell your pictures, smugmug.com, because you can host either video or stills there. They have an engine that lets you do everything from display to sell to send electronically to the print house to have drop shipped to your client, including in a frame, so that you never have to touch any of it. That's over at SmugMug. Both those companies are great supporters of Photofocus, and we appreciate it.
Great. Yeah, those are some great things to check out. So, couple questions that have been coming in, and these are ones that are sort of evergreen questions. Let's start with the first one, which is shutter speed. I got into an in-depth conversation this week with a few folks about choosing the right shutter speed. My conversation was around video, but it also carries back to stills and the exposure triangle. I think a lot of people struggle with this. They don't think about the benefit of what it is they're trying to do. I was shooting time-lapse the other day, and I purposely was dragging the shutter. I was shooting a lower light situation like traffic in the evening, and I wanted the streaks of the cars going through to portray that sense of motion and energy. On the other hand, we were doing a different shoot the other day, and we wanted to freeze the moment in time, and the shutter speed was happening. Just a couple practical pieces of advice, Scott. I mean, how do you approach this? What goes through your head? Any simple rules?
Well, I'm a guy that thinks the most important creative control in the camera is actually the aperture. So unless I'm in a situation where the shutter speed really has to dictate what's going on, I let the shutter speed be subservient to the aperture. There are clearly times when the shutter speed is the most important thing. If I'm photographing moving cars, if I'm photographing moving anything, sports, wildlife, auto racing, then the shutter speed becomes very important because you have to shoot at anywhere between, for instance, a 2,000th and a 4,000th of a second to capture every single feather of an eagle in flight tack sharp.
Now, do you switch to manual at that point, or are you going into shutter priority?
I go shutter priority. I only shoot manual whenever I'm shooting with strobes.
Okay, and I go manual when I'm shooting video, just because, yeah, I can't. You can't. Have things changing.
And for video as well. You're right, because we've got the 180 rule and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, on the video side, a lot of people struggle. There is sort of a base rule for shooting video, which is you take your frame rate, you multiply by 2, and you put a 1 on top. So if you were shooting 30 frames a second, a 60th is going to produce the most natural looking motion. But as you change that, for example, if you have really fast motion, it could start to feel jittery or staccato like an action movie. Or if you were dealing with a tough situation and you were just running out of the range, like maybe you're on a zoom lens and you couldn't open up the aperture enough, you might have to cheat and go to a 30th. But one of the things people forget is when shooting video, you can't go any slower than a 30th of a second if you're shooting 30 frames per second. It's kind of a 1-to-1 ratio there. Now,
yeah, generally, I recommend a 30th, a 60th, or 125th, and that's unless you've got. Again, these are very general recommendations. If you want your movie to look like Gladiator or 300, then you'll use a very fast shutter speed, and you'll get that staccato look.
Yeah.
But generally, 60th is pretty much my normal speed. I'll shoot 125th if I'm going to use stuff for slow-mo, because you want to have a faster frame rate to take it down.
Yeah, shooting at 60 frames per second then.
Yeah. So stuff like that, that's just the basics. And then you actually end up, in my experience, I've moved to these very ND filters from Stingray, and you can get them from other companies. Those are the way I set my exposure now in video cameras. I set a fairly standard f-stop. The shutter speed's always locked in at pretty much a 60th unless I got something special going on. And then I use the very ND filter to control how much light gets through the iris.
And that's nice because if you're not twiddling with your ISO, you're not going to start getting more noise in some shots or others. You're taking an optical approach rather than a digital approach, right?
Right. I learned the hard way. And that's the way to do it. And that's the biggest, and that's the really, in my opinion, this is the biggest reason to buy a real video camera.
Yeah, because it does it for you.
Because, they've got built-in ND filters. The first time I used a real video camera, I was like, what's this switch? No.
Yeah.
No kidding, really? And I'm like, okay, so how come that switch would be no more expensive to implement in my Canon 1DX? They just take it out because if it were in the 1DX, it'd be less reason to buy the C300.
Yeah, there's reasons, and most of them are artificial why they have some benefits in other cameras. I think video cameras and still cameras could learn a lot from each other. We'll have to see. In my opinion, the only company that seems to be kind of meeting in the middle is Red, but they have their own issues of what they do well and what they don't do well. So yeah, it's interesting. Now let's switch gears. Another question that always comes up is contrast, achieving proper contrast. And one of the things I was just doing this week, I was teaching a workshop, and we started looking at the histogram, and I was amazed at how many people don't look at the histogram when post-processing, but even fewer looked at it when shooting. And this to me is just such a fundamental tool because my eyes are subject to such changes from the environment. If I'm in a darker area or a brighter area, if I'm shooting outdoors, obviously we can get around this a little bit with things like loops or a hood, but I'm surprised at how many people don't look at the histogram as a tool to help them understand contrast.
Well, I think it goes back to the same thing that we're talking about. I mean, a lot of people who are new at photography don't want to admit that they need help with.
I'm not new, and I still need help.
Yeah, that they don't understand what contrast even is. It's the difference between the dark and the light areas in the photograph, and that range, that tonality range, is very important to understand. And you want to get a hold of that in both capture and in post. In capture, what you want to do is get as much data as possible, Rich, right? I think you would agree with that.
Yeah. And when I'm shooting video, I'm tending to shoot just a tad underexposed because it's easier to recover if there's an issue. So I let the hump of the histogram move just a little to the left of center. When shooting stills, I'm tending to shoot in center or slightly to the right. Obviously, RAW is a lot more flexible, but how do you read that when you're looking at the histogram, or do you have any tips on contrast?
I think that the way it was explained to me by Chuck Westfall, tech guru at Canon, is that those 5 sections that are sort of represented on the histogram on a Canon camera, each one has exponentially more data as you move to the right. So there's a lot more data in the far right histogram than the far left histogram.
Yeah.
And data is your friend when it comes to building mask and doing curves, adjustments, etc. in post. So I am a shoot to the right proponent. I'm not one of those that shoot to the right, like take it to the very edge, blow it off the edge, 255 and done. But I am going to cheat a little bit to the right because then I can bring that back in RAW. And when I'm building, curves, I mean, masks are your friend. You can mask out certain areas and work on just those areas in post to enhance the contrast in just a small area. We did this in the old days. We actually built contrast masks. Now they were actually used more for sharpening in the darkroom, but that's another podcast.
Yeah.
Dodging and burning is a way to enhance or change contrast. The bottom line is that you want to pay attention to the gradation from dark to light or light to dark in your photographs. And where that is extreme, i.e. the sun's in the photo and there's a thing in shade in the photo, you're going to be overwhelmed. You're not going to be able to capture all that contrast unless you move into HDR. So there are many things to think about when it comes to contrast, but I think you look at it as a team effort. In camera, you try to shoot a little bit to the right if you're doing stills, and that's who most of our audience are.
Yeah.
And then in post, learn how to use the curves tool, people. It's not that hard.
Well, and on the curves tool front, in Photoshop, when you're in Camera Raw, the curves are limited, but there are some useful presets for going after the midtones and everything else. But one of my favorite things in curves is there's this little tool that kind of looks like Photoshop's giving you the finger. It's the pointer, not the middle. But if you take that tool and you click, it'll intelligently add a control point for the curve. So you don't have to guess, well, where should I be pulling up or down? You just mouse over the image and click, and it'll add the control point. So using an adjustment layer is a great way. Curves are one of those things that as you play with them and you go nice and slow, we've had some good tutorials over at Photofocus as well. They are incredibly powerful, and they really bring out the control of what you want to do when using those images. So I find that RAW is great on that front. The other thing that I'm sometimes surprised that people still monkey with, maybe you still use these too, but you've got those in-camera presets, vivid, landscape, things like that. They kind of work for me, but I find that, I can access all of those in the raw file after the fact, that I like to shoot with none of that nonsense and just capture the image and make those decisions afterwards when I'm in a more controlled situation and I could really see things. I've got more measurement tools. I think those sort of camera presets are more for back in the day when JPEG was all we had.
Yeah, I shoot 95% RAW, so I don't mess with those because those settings mean nothing if you're shooting in RAW.
Yeah. Yeah, you can access them after the fact. All right, well, it's pretty straight stuff there. Scott, why don't we take a quick moment to thank a couple of our other sponsors for the show?
Yeah, I think it might I just want to briefly mention that we do have a banner on the Photofocus homepage that you can click that will take you to Amazon, which has all kinds of camera stuff. And if you do that, you end up supporting the show, and it doesn't cost you a penny more than if you were to do it without us. So if you want to support the show, that's a great way to do it. I also want to mention ViewBug. ViewBug is running a contest with Photofocus where we're giving away more than $10,000 worth of prizes. And it's a photo contest. It's not a Twitter contest. You have to actually enter photos. The photo entry fee is $0. We're not gouging you. And you give up no rights. We're not stealing your copyrights. In fact, your photo won't even be published anywhere unless you win. The only right you're giving up is the right for us to publish the winner. So check that out. You can click on the ViewBug icon on the homepage at photofocus.com. Also, should just briefly mention that Rich and I, as well as a host of other co-contributors, make sure that you get free content every single day, 7 days a week, including Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving. It doesn't matter. All at photofocus.com. We've been doing it there a long time. It's gonna be there for a while, I hope. And so just click on that every day to find out new tips, tutorials, and tricks, etc.
Great. Now, Scott, a couple quick things I want to dig into. One of these I know you're an expert at, and that is getting access to areas. Well, what I mean is like a lot of times when you're shooting, it becomes difficult. For example, when I was down in Panama and I was shooting the Panama Canal, I wanted to get a high-angle shot. I was shooting time-lapse, and they had the observation deck closed. And I was shoved in the same area as everybody else and getting bumped and jostled because they had the top deck closed. I went up one more level. There was a restaurant, and it was only for people who were dining. Of course, I just said, well, why don't I stage my camera, have everything set, walked up with a $20 bill in my hand and said, could I shoot on the balcony for 5 minutes? And they left me alone for half an hour, and it was great. But it's amazing. Obviously, money is one way, but doing your homework in advance where you can get control, getting access to rooftops, getting the right shot. Any practical tips you have other than obviously location scouting or doing your homework? I think you turned sometimes to Twitter or to some of your social networks to find leads into places.
I've actually had somebody on Twitter provide me with the GPS location of some graffiti I wanted to shoot against. I mean, Twitter is an amazing tool in that regard. And in fact, I've gotten access to racetracks, to places like Disneyland, all kinds of places by just saying, hey, I'm going to be over in such and such. Do any of you work at this place? And if so, can you hook me up? And like 9 people will respond. So yes, the social networks is the secret, with the backups that I've already talked about on the show many times, which is Benjamin Franklin is always your friend when it comes to access. Places that are sacred, holy, completely inaccessible are all of a sudden okay if Ben shows up. Having cops on your side always works. So I always go hire a cop, and that rooftop that you can't get into under any circumstances is now wide open all day. I believe that another way to do it if you don't have the money is to volunteer. So, for instance, down here in Vegas, we have the Neon Museum. I'm personally convinced that the people that run it all used to work at, Dachau in Poland for the SS, because they just seem to revel in being able to say no to anything and anybody about anything. I'm not quite sure what the point of this museum is, since they don't
they don't want to share it.
They don't let anybody actually go into it unless there's certain very crazy circumstances. They've just about shut it down to photography. But if you volunteer at that place, then maybe you worm your way into getting some access that you wouldn't have been able to get as the general public. So volunteering is a great way. For instance, somebody asked me in an email, well, how do I get started shooting sports? Well, every high school, would love to have you on the sidelines shooting sports for the yearbook, for the newsletter, for the website, and they don't have any budget for it. So offer to do it for free in return for access. That gets you some practice, then do it at the college, then maybe you get into the pros with your portfolio. It always starts with trying to find a way to be useful, or trying to find somebody who is useful to help you, or buying your way in.
Well, and to that end, one other way of buying your way in, a lot of people have to travel for different reasons. And I've found that if I actually communicate with the hotel, like if I reach out before I arrive and I explain, oh, I'd like to shoot sunrise or sunset, or which view is the most photogenic, that you can often request a higher floor or better access. The last trip I went on, it was $10 a day more to have a view of the ocean and beautiful sunrises to shoot. And it was just a matter of communicating in advance. And I think a lot of people forget that. You are going to be traveling for different reasons. Here's a great opportunity. And I think that, if you just do a little bit of planning, and actually to that end, I'll often use, and we'll talk more about apps in a second, but an app called Light Track for the iPad. It's available for other platforms. And it allows me to sort of see a combination view of a Google map plus the position of the sunrise and the sunset on any day, and I can see where it's going to be. So I can use that as a guideline. And sometimes when you're talking to the front desk, these are not necessarily people you could say, oh, I'd like an east-facing room. But if I'm looking at the map, I could say, oh, can I have a room that faces Tropicana Boulevard? Oh, sure. And then you've got that room, and it's the room you wanted. So sometimes it's just a matter of speaking the same language. And I think that's a great app. Any other things on getting access you'd like to share?
Yeah, I will say this works very well for those of you that are shooting in the national parks. Talk to the rangers. First of all, let them know what you're doing. That's important, so they don't think you're a terrorist. And then ask them, hey, where's the wolf pack? Where are the bears? Where are the elk? They'll often be helpful once you acknowledge them and establish that they're the authority there. Ask them for help, permission, guidance on where to go. Let them know what you're doing. Let them know the reason for the shots. Let them know it's non-commercial, because if it's commercial, you need a permit. If it's commercial, tell them that too and get the permit. Do not cheat on that, because you can get thrown in jail at national parks for not having a permit. That's good. And the other super secret, Rich, this is my most super secret tip. Look for a guy standing by any closed gate. If there's a closed gate,
there's good photos on the other side.
There are good photos on the other side.
Or aliens, which would make good photos too.
Now, the sad truth about our society is that college dropouts are paid $1 million a game to play basketball, but the guy standing in front of that closed gate's making $8.25 an hour. And a $50 bill is going to impact his life in a big way. So, for instance, most of us that shoot in New Mexico, who go down to, the desert out there, and we want to go shoot the cactus flowers, and we want to go to Alamogordo, know that there's a gate that that takes the best places on the nuclear, testing site, and it's open to the public after like 8 a.m. But the best shots are at 6. And there's a kid that for $50 will be there at 6 to let you in. So anytime you see a lock gate, pause, pay attention to what's going on, and say, what's on the other side of that gate? Especially if there's a human there. There's more than likely something that a 20, a 50, or 100 will get you access to that's really, really good. In my case, for instance, I was at a zoo. I'm not going to give this up because I don't want to get the guy in trouble. But this was a zoo where there was a baby elephant. And the baby elephant was like the hottest thing in the zoo. Hundreds of thousands of people were coming just to see the baby elephant. All day long on the news, they had talked about the baby elephant. I'm wandering around the zoo. I really don't really care about the baby elephant. I was actually shooting birds. And I was going to the aviary, and I see this guy standing in front of this gate, in front of this big, tall fence, which just triggered the Scott Bourne, there's a guy standing in front of a gate rule, which caused me to walk over to him and go, hey, what's behind the gate? He goes, oh, that's Shamu, the baby elephant, or whatever its name was. I said, my friend Benjamin Franklin and I would really like a view from this angle. He says, you got 5 minutes. I get the only unobstructed shots of the baby elephant without a fence between me and the elephant. Everybody else I see on the other side shooting is shooting through a fence. I got nothing but clean air between me and the elephant for 5 minutes. It was worth the $100. So, that's the thing.
Well, and one of my favorite places to actually shoot is zoos or nature parks. You often have such wonderful variety, and I find that it's great practice to just have so many different shooting conditions. So yeah, that's a good thing to look for. And I am going to try that closed gate rule, although I don't know if I'll have the hundreds to offer him, but we'll try it.
Well, you can start with 20 and move up to 50 and then go to 100 if it's important enough. By the way, don't try to get into the lion's den.
Yeah.
Just my advice.
Only go for animals that probably wouldn't eat you. That's a good piece of advice.
Yeah.
Good. Well, let's talk a little bit about a couple of favorite apps here to take us to the end. You mentioned to me earlier that there's a new iPhone intervalometer for those of you into shooting time-lapse. And tell me about what you found.
Well, now it's not a favorite app yet because I just got it and I'm waiting for the cord, but it's called IO Shutter, and it sure looks good. It accomplishes everything that a fancy thing you buy for your camera at the camera store would. It's just controlled by an app, and this particular one I believe works on iPhones. I don't know if it works on Android, but it has a timer, a bulb, a time-lapse function. It even has an anti-shake feature. I'm not quite sure how that works, but you can set up with this cable that runs between your iPhone. So it has the iPhone dock connector, which means, by the way, it won't work with the iPhone 5.
There's going to have to be some sort of adapter to make that work.
It's just so stupid. Anyway, and then it has the connector that fits your particular camera, allegedly, or some kind of device. I have the app, and I've looked at the app. It's very cool looking. I don't have the cable.
Okay, well, when you get that in hand, we'll do a review.
But if it works, it's going to be the reason I don't throw my iPhone 4S away ever, because I'll keep it just for that.
Well, and it's amazing because you have such processing power and a small thing with these phones that an intervalometer with complex features should be possible. Another app that I've been playing with a lot is Snapseed, and obviously a lot of folks like the Nik plugins. This isn't a new one, but this is an app that I'm finding is doing a great job because of its selective adjustment. So one of the areas that's kind of weak, and I've been putting two and two together, is I'll shoot an HDR on the iPhone, not with the built-in iPhone app, but with one that takes 2 exposures and a little manual control. And then their ability to selectively add control points lets me just make great skies. I get people all the time like, how did you get that great sky? And they're thinking that I'm just developing and then uploading through the phone. It's like, no, I'm using the phone itself. And I'm finding that combination of shooting HDR and then using Snapseed for selective contrast or selective color really brings out that drama, which I like. Do you have any other favorite ones that you're using as photography? We mentioned Light Track earlier. I think that's a useful one for sort of scouting locations. Anything else stand out for you?
Well, I'm using a really great, I mean, many people who are paying attention know that I have been conducting an experiment with, for the very first time in my adult life, moving outside of the Apple ecosystem. And I have to say it's been painful. But I really like the screen on the Samsung S3 Android phone. I like the camera. I like this. As far as the phone goes, it works good. It's got everything. I still have some struggles with anything Android. I need to sit down with one of you Android experts for a couple hours in return for my photo knowledge and have somebody actually help me dial this thing in, which is why I think Apple eventually wins, because grandma can plug in an iPhone and it works. But there's a great app not made by SmugMug. Let's make this clear.
Sure.
It's made by a third party. It's called SmugFolio. Now, SmugMug actually has a free app that you can use to get your photos, to your phone, etc., whatever you want to do. But this thing called SmugFolio, which is like $2.99, is a lot better. And I have been able to move stuff to and from my SmugMug portfolio and onto my phone, which looks beautiful on this big S3 screen. And I think, it's probably the best solution I've seen on an Android phone, and I really like it a lot, and it's worth paying the $2.99 for. So SmugFolio, if you're a SmugMug user, of course you have to have a SmugMug account, but that's something you want to look at.
Great.
And by the way, this is officially like the first time in my life I've ever talked about a smartphone app that's not an iPhone app.
Is it available for the iPhone? Because it might be.
I have no idea.
No problem. Well, I look forward.
See, it's not really necessary on the iPhone.
Yeah, I'm going to steal your Samsung phone and play with it for a little bit, and it'll be interesting. I am fearfully optimistic for the next iPhone of what they're going to do, if anything. The rumor mill on the internet's not charging me with confidence yet, although that's we'll see what happens. Sometimes they're good at keeping the secrets.
All we know for sure is that the 721 iPhone connectors that you currently own will not work.
Obsolete. Yeah. Well, fortunately,
it's not like Apple's ever done this before. Oh, wait a minute, they have the 3.5-inch floppy, USB 2, FireWire 400, FireWire 800.
At least when they came out with the new power supplies for the laptops, they did come out with a little $10 adapter to take all my old power plugs and still make them work. But yeah, it was one more thing, and then I had to wait. I just got the Thunderbolt to FireWire adapter, and it works. Here's the bad news, though, and actually, this is a good thing for our readers. I did a little experiment yesterday. I picked up a Thunderbolt adapter so I could take some of my portable drives in the field. And then I had some USB 3 drives, and I actually took the same drive and put it into the USB 3 connection and the Thunderbolt connection. The Thunderbolt connection cost me $150 more because it was $100 for the chassis, and it was another $50 or $40, whatever they charge for the cable. 48. And I was getting like 113 megabytes a second, that way. When I went to the USB 3, I was getting 108. And I'm like, oh, so Thunderbolt portable drives, not really worth it, And the thing is that the USB, I tried the Thunderbolt to FireWire adapter. I have a bunch of G-RAID ones that are like 2 drives in a single thing for performance. Great for video, great for fast backups. Not enough juice to drive it. I have to carry an external power supply. So I'm quickly falling in love with USB 3 for my portable workflow because it's so much cheaper and faster. I never thought I'd actually like USB, but I'm finding Thunderbolt to be overkill for my mobile stuff. I know you love it for the desktop, but I just wanted to caution folks before you spend that premium for mobile drives, it's kind of a waste.
Well, until they come out with native mobile drives that support Thunderbolt and that are as fast.
Yeah, and SSDs do make a difference too.
Yeah. Now that's my next thing. Is I've got 7 now of the Pegasus R6 stacks, each with 12 terabytes.
Well, I'm visiting you in a few weeks, Scott. I'm absolutely sure you only have 5 of them. I only saw 5 on your desk. I've saved a spot in my suitcase where 2 will fit.
And then the next one I'm buying is the all SSD version. So I think it'll be like $1 billion, but I'm buying it.
Okay, and you're just going to set it up in like race files, and you're going to be posting screenshots of like disk speed test utilities. Just
well, here's the thing. I can already move an entire CD's worth of data in 3.4 seconds. I'm hoping to have that with SSD.
All right. Well, I'll look at that, and I'm trying some more SSD options out as well.
You know what us racers say? You can't fake fast.
All right. Well, and if you're curious, like, how in the world do they know these numbers? I actually discovered a very useful app for free on the Mac App Store from Blackmagic, and it does drive testing. It tells you what your drive can handle and the amount of speed, and it'll do different throughput and test file sizes. Absolutely free. They have it available for Windows off of their site. Blackmagic makes professional video cards, but it's a great free utility for testing drives. So that's just from Blackmagic, and I think that's useful. Scott, any other announcements for our listeners before we wrap up today's show?
No, just hope that we get a chance to see everybody at Photoshop World. It's going to be a ton of fun. There are a ton of activities planned around that event. I do want to just briefly mention that also going to work on and want some help with this, the idea of starting a Las Vegas photo festival next summer. So I'm putting that out there now because several groups have discussed it with me, and we want to have like a photo festival like they have in New York, but we want to move it to Las Vegas. So I'm planting a seed way, way, way early for that.
Great. Well, those of you who are going to be out for Vegas around Photoshop World time, be sure to look us up. Follow Scott and I on Twitter, and you'll find out news for some activities and get-togethers, and we'll both be teaching, so be sure to come up and say hi. For Photofocus, my name's Rich Harrington. You're welcome to follow me on Twitter at RedPixel. That's RHEDPIXEL, and I regularly contribute to the Photofocus blog. And Scott, where can people find you?
You can find me on photofocus.com, scottbourne.com, and if you want, follow me on Twitter, Scott Bourne, SCOTTBOURNE. And I have no idea how to tell you how to find me there, but I am on Google+.
Yeah, Google hasn't figured out that giving each user a unique 63-digit number doesn't really make it easy to find.
Yeah, I'm googleplus.com, 63 different numbers. That's me.
Good.
So if you can find me on there and you want to circle me, feel free.
Great. Well, thanks a lot for joining us. We'll be back in 10 days with more. This is Photofocus.